Amwarara pongana wahorike etitatunari tuyambe kereni. This is Africa Good Morning, the show that keeps you abreast with the latest happenings across the continent. My name is Aina Raizakoya alongside Diana Master. Top of the morning.
Top of the morning to you, ma'am. Mwalelepo?
Twalelepo now. Mwarara pongana. Love that.
Let's get into what you can expect in today's broadcast. Afghan universities reopened, but women still barred. Malnutrition in pregnancy surges in poor countries. Tanzania bans boarding for nursery and lower primary schools. We're also going to be chatting to Ari Hochad in Cape Town to give us the latest news on the ground. Stay tuned because our top story is coming up right after this.
Yo, Joe, what's up, man? Good. Congratulations on your new promotions, man. Give these men a drink.
Coming right up. Hi, Joe.
Please drive sober. I didn't.
In our top stories this morning, Afghan universities are open, but women are still barred. Now, Afghan universities reopened on Monday after a winter break, but only men returned to class, with the heartbreaking ban of the Taliban authorities on women in higher education still in force. The university ban is one of the several restrictions imposed on women since the Taliban stormed back into power in August 2021 and has sparked global outrage, including across the Muslim world. The Taliban government imposed the ban after accusing women students of ignoring a strict dress code and a requirement to be accompanied by a male relative to and from campus. Most universities had already introduced gender-segregated entrances and classrooms, as well as allowing women to be taught only by female professors or elderly men. Ejutla Nejeti, an engineering student at Kabul University, Afghanistan's largest, said it was a fundamental right of women to study. Even if they attend classes on separate days, it's not a problem. They have a right to education, and that right should be given to them, he said as he entered the university campus. Several Taliban officials says the ban on women's education is temporary, but despite promises, they have failed to reopen secondary school for girls, which have been closed for more than a year.
Getting into our next story, malnutrition in pregnancy surges in poor countries. The number of pregnant women and girls who are suffering from malnutrition has soared by 25% in the last 2 years, the UN Children's Agency UNICEF says. The world's poorest regions such as Somalia, Ethiopia and Afghanistan have been the most affected, its report finds. UNICEF estimates that more than 1 billion women and adolescent girls worldwide are malnourished. It says recent crises, including war and COVID, have made it increasingly hard for them to get the food they need. UNICEF has urged the international community to make food security a priority, including supporting failing nutrition programs. It stressed the impact the malnutrition is having on children's health. The UNICEF report found that 1 billion undernourished women and adolescent girls were underweight and of short stature. As a result, according to data analysis of women in most countries in the world, it also found that they suffered from a deficiency in essential micronutrients, as well as from anemia. South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa remain the epicenter of the nutrition crisis among adolescent girls and women, the report said. It found that 68% of women and adolescent girls there were underweight, and 60% of those suffered from anemia. Inadequate nutrition during girls' and women's lives can lead to weakened immunity, poor cognitive development, and an increased risk of life-threatening complications, including during pregnancy and childbirth, UNICEF said.
Now, in our next story, an Al Jazeera documentary on Zimbabwe's gold trade is causing headaches for government. A hyped but yet to be screened Al Jazeera investigation into the illicit gold trade and corruption linking powerful elites and politicians in Zimbabwe has sparked a public relation disaster in government and ruling party circles. This has forced Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe Governor John Mungoja to spring bring up and clarify that targeted sanctions on the country do not affect its international trade. Therefore, criminal enterprises claiming to be sanction bursting were using backdoor tactics for selfish gains. Criminal networks turn dirty cash into gold, which is sold around the world. The investigation leads to the highest offices of the state in Southern Africa. The Al Jazeera teaser said Stanley, a Chinese criminal with connections with the trades network, served as the team's leader. Members of the competing gold mafia gangs were befriended by undercover reporters. Snippets of the documentary shown to a select group of journalists in Zimbabwe revealed government officials and diplomats in private meeting with Kamlesh Patni, once implicated in the Golden Bag scandal that siphoned about 10.8 billion rand from Kenya in the 1990s but was acquitted in 2013. Another interview was set up with Patni's competitor and convicted gold smuggler Awan Macmillan, who has close links with the most powerful politicians in Zimbabwe. Now, the spokesperson for the presidency, George Charamba, chose not to comment on what has not been made public when asked by journalists.
Now moving over to Tanzania, boarding for nursery and lower primary schools has been banned. Tanzania's Ministry of Education has abolished boarding schools for nursery to standard 4 pupils. The directive took immediate effect on March 1st, 2023. Through a document signed by the ministry's Education Commissioner, Dr. Liabwene Mtahabwa, to education stakeholders in the country, the abolition should be implemented by the end of the first term this year. It is not allowed to provide boarding services to pupils of nursery and standard 1 except with a special permit that will be issued by the Commissioner of Education after receiving an application from the relevant stakeholder, the Commissioner notes. Dr. Mtahabwa said that the move is part of the implementation of the guidelines for the initiation of school registration issued by the ministry in November 2020. On the other hand, she said a child's upbringing and development is highly dependent on the great contribution made by the family through the parents or guardians of the child. However, it has been found that there are some schools that have been receiving young pupils from nursery to standard 4, she said.
Congolese Tutsi describe a violent campaign to stop them voting. A group of Congolese Tutsis were guarded by armed police as they registered to vote in the eastern town of Nyangezi in February, with one of the group describing a campaign of threats and violence aimed at excluding them from the upcoming elections. One newly registered voter at the enrollment center had a bruised face and curled her wrist after she allegedly was beaten with sticks and rocks by youth on her way to sign up. They were saying, "Go home," said Philippe Ruhara, a local representative of the Tutsi ethnic group in South Kivu province known as Banyamulenge. Look at how her arm is broken, her face injured," he said on the 25th of February, gesturing towards the woman who has asked not to be named or quoted. He said members of his community had received anonymous leaflets warning them to not vote, part of a hostile campaign that has been seen by groups of young men gathered at the registration centers to deter the Tutsis from voting.
We close with our top stories in Zimbabwe, where Zimparks conducts a hippopotamus census on a stretch of the Zambezi River. The Zimbabwe National Parks and Wildlife Management and African Wildlife Foundation, based in Kenya, are at an advanced stage of aggregating and analyzing data from a hippopotamus census conducted on the Zambezi River last year. The census was done in winter because that's when the Zambezi River is clear with good visibility for hippos. The spokesperson for Zimparks, Tinashe Farao, told the News 24 the census was carried out over a stretch of 324 kilometers of the 2,700 kilometer Zambezi River. The census was on the Zimbabwe-Zambia part of the Zambezi River. It's about 324 kilometers, he said. He said the results would speak to policy making at a time when the climate change was affecting the third largest living land mammal. He said that the river has had fluctuating water levels in recent years and that affects hippos' semi-aquatic environments. The last hippo censuses in Zimbabwe were in 1996, 1998 and 2002. Now, while results from last year's survey had not been made public, the previous three showed an average of 6,130 hippos from a range between 5,736 to 6,320 in 818 groups from a range of between 718 to 927.
The South African cabinet has changed. Some people are happy about it, some people not so much. Ari Houghad brings us the news from South Africa after the break.
Please walk responsibly. I did not. Ma'am?
Now, mixed reactions from different political parties as President Cyril Ramaphosa makes changes to the South African cabinet. Here to give us the story, Ari Houghad. Good morning, Ari. Please tell us, what are the new changes?
Yes, good morning, Diana. Yes, quite a few changes that was some mostly expected. So it was more a case, if you look at the criticism that came in, is centered around it more that the president look at allies and people that is on his side of the politics in his own political party. So it's more a question of loyalty versus competence. But the big news is that there's a new minister, a deputy minister, or deputy president rather. It's Paul Mashatile. So that was expected. New Minister of Electricity, so everybody is glad about that. Hopefully that can change things with all the load shedding. That is Patricia de Lille. She's also the new Minister of Tourism. That was one of the moves that the president did make. Kalindile Sisulu, she kind of went against him, and she's no longer the Minister of Tourism. She's been in that position or in cabinet for 22 years. So that's the new Minister of Electricity, Mr. Kosciuszko Ramaphosa, and he will be have a big responsibility to pull things together for South Africa with the electricity. So quite a few changes. I think he was also the president had to manage Kusato and the South African Communist Party, which are a coalition with him, and also what happened in the ANC conference in December. So he went for some of his friends, so to say. So hopefully they're competent to do the work.
All right, now we understand South Africa's economy shrank by 1.3% in its fourth quarter because of power outages. Tell us about this.
Yes, that was not a good quarter for the economy related to the electricity or to power load shedding. Just 2 days in that whole quarter that there wasn't any load shedding, and mostly it was load shedding level 3. So that must have a massive influence on the economy. To put it into context, 10 sectors of the economy, and only three of them showed a positive growth, also not big growth, but 7 of them down. Most significantly, agriculture there down 3.3%. In that quarter, also finance down 2.3%, and then mining down 3.2%. And you can understand mining with all the electricity needs going down. So it's not good news for South Africa. Since 2019, South Africa's economy has just grew by 0.3%. Obviously, there was COVID in the process as well, but 6 industries are still on pre-COVID figures. So the economy under pressure, and Eskom's got a big role to play in it.
I mean, we have seen, businesses like Woolworths throwing away thousands of rands worth of meat. So it's only understandable that power outages are the cause of this. Now getting into your next story, public servants affiliated to the National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union continue mass protests despite a court interdict against it. What happened? Tell us about this.
Yes, in effect, they're ignoring a court interdict of the Labour Court on Saturday that said they're not allowed to strike. And so they said the argument is that they feel a different court will have a different outcome on this. So they continue. They basically they will go against the ruling of the court. So that's a challenge for hospitals, etc. You can imagine there's people being turned away from hospitals. There's also some of the ministries that's battling there. departments that battling home affairs, for instance, that don't have people that work there. So in core quickly, they're asking for 10 to 12% increase. That is tough, taking into consideration the unemployment in the country and also the growth that we just talked about. The government offering 4.7%. So that's ongoing. Hopefully they can sort that out, but they'll find them in the middle somewhere between 4% and 10% to offer them an increase of that.
All right, now, are 16 black-owned wine brands will represent South Africa in New York. Tell us briefly about this.
Yes, it's in New York. It's the Wine Expo. It's a quite distinguished wine expo. Some of the wines that we can look out for in future is Highbury and Goederust wines, Breach of Hope. So it's from the 8th to the 9th of March. South Africa represented there. One of the nice stories, Yazi, you can remember the name. They're owned by 65 wine farm workers. So Tokozani is owned by 65 farm workers. So great to have them in New York, telling about great wine in South Africa. South Africa do have some of the best wine in the world. So it's great to see everybody getting exposure there. So good on them, and all the best for them in New York.
Of course, that is definitely some great news, and I look forward to having some of that wine when I come on over to Cape Town. Thank you so much, Ari, for bringing us latest news on the ground.
Yes, indeed. We'll have the white wine on ice for you.
I will be waiting and I will be ready. All right, we're going to take a quick ad break and come back with our economic news.
In our economic news this morning, Kenyan firms turn to Tanzania for US dollar. Kenya's commercial banks are running out of US dollars, and as a result, some of Kenyan firms have started sourcing dollars from neighboring countries, especially Tanzania. The shortage of the US currency has made it difficult for manufacturers and general good importers to meet their obligation. The Central Bank of Kenya has directed commercial banks to ration dollars following a shortage of the currency and the race to protect reserves.
Now getting into our next story, Community Development Foundation reject Agriculture Minister's food claims as impossible. One of Mozambique's most prominent non-governmental organizations, the Community Development Foundation, has described as impossible the claim by Agriculture Minister Celso Correa that 90% of Mozambicans are eating 3 meals a day. Last week at a meeting in Rome with the General Director of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, Qdonyu, Correa said 90% of the Mozambican population is food secure. That is, they're eating 3 meals a day. This is a great success for Mozambicans, and now our great challenge is to ensure this is sustainable.
All right, let's look at our economic indicators and thereafter sports with Ari Hogad.
Good day everyone, time for international sports news, starting off with cycling news today. It is the Paris-Nice cycle tour taking place. It was stage 2 that's concluded. It was 164 kilometers. It was from Bezansville to Fontainebleau, and the winner there was Mats Pettersen, and he is from Norway, and he won in a group sprint to the end, just a few hundredths of a second in front of Olaf Koy in second place. Third place in this second stage was Magnus Kort Nielsen. The general classification, it is Mats Pettersen that is still in the lead. He was the leader, he was a yellow jersey leader after stage 1 as well, and his combined time after 2 stages, 7 hours, 19 minutes and 35 seconds. Just 2 seconds behind him, one of the early favourites, that is Tojas Pogacar, and in third position it is Tim Merlier. He is 4 seconds behind Pedersen. The third stage will be a time trial. That will be a team time trial, and that will be over 32.2 kilometers. And some teams to look out for is the UAE Team Emirates and also the Jumbo Visma team. Going on to soccer news, midweek game that was played, English Premier League, it was a London derby. It was a Brentford that beat Fulham in a very exciting game, and Brentford won by 3-2. And the two of these two teams fighting it out to try and get into the Europa League, that is finishing in the top 8 within positions 5 and 8, where they were likely to finish. At the moment, it's Brentford moving up to 9th position now. They've got 38 points after 24 games. They've played 2 games less than Fulham. Fulham, after 26 games, they've got 39 points in 7th position. So it's quite a tight race to get into that top 8 for both these teams. Brentford, next game this coming Saturday, they're away to Everton, and a tough game for Fulham. Fulham will go to Arsenal, and they will play against Arsenal. So that will be tough to beat the lot leaders of the English Premier League. Moving on to cricket news, that is cricket news from South Africa, that South African Proteas currently hosting the West Indies, and news from the T20 team is that it is Aiden Markram that will be the new T20 captain. He's replacing Temba Bavuma that stepped down as a T20 captain. He is now the captain of the Test team. Also former Protea international, that is JP Duminy. He's been appointed on a permanent basis on management as the batting coach of the T20 side. The T20 side will play against the West Indies after the Test series, and it is Anrich Nortje and Kagiso Rabada, both fast bowlers for the Proteas. They will be rested in the T20 series against the West Indies. The second test between the West Indies and South African Proteas, that will start on Wednesday, and that test will be played at the Wanderers. The first test the South Africans won at Centurion. Closing off today's international sports news with tennis news, it's ATP tennis news. It is the Indian Wells tournament that is starting in a few days' time in California. That is also called the BNP Paribas Open. News from the tournament is that world number 1, that is Novak Djokovic, unfortunately had to withdraw from the tournament. He is not unable to enter the United States. There's still regulations in place in the United States to enter the country with you must be vaccinated, and at the moment Novak Djokovic is not vaccinated, so he couldn't enter the United States for this tournament. He could also not play in the US Open of 2022. Current regulations in place of the USA regarding COVID-19 might change on the 10th of April. That means that it is possible for Novak Djokovic to play in the 2023 US Open. If those regulations change, the US Open tennis tournament will be the 28th of August till the 10th of September. But for the Indian Wells tournament now, it is Novak Djokovic not going to be in action. That's international sports news for today. Hope you have a great sport day, and we talk again tomorrow. Goodbye.
And that brings us to the end of our show. But before we sign off, let's take a look at the highlights. Afghan universities reopen, but women still barred. Malnutrition in pregnancy surges in poor countries. Explosive Al Jazeera documentary on Zimbabwe's illicit gold trade causing headaches for government. Kenyan firms turn to Tanzania for US dollars.
Thank you very much for joining us on Africa Good Morning. We do welcome your remarks regarding our show. You can post them on our Twitter and Facebook pages. And on that note, it's all our love, all our light, and a very beautiful, blessed Wednesday.